right now I'm just me, which means that my costs are relatively low. My value demonstration is relatively simplistic, and that I have a relatively self-selected clientele right now. People call me and they go, man, I got these problems, I looked at the other tools, and I think yours is better. Will you come and I'll give you some money? And I go, yeah. So I'm in the lucky position of, for the few clients I have, not having to demonstrate value because they're already convinced before they call me. As I get more employees, I may be able to bring on 1 to 2 employees in the next month, people who are going to be more like partners. Clearly the sales cycle is going to have to be stronger, I'm going to have to get more things like that. I'm going to have to get a lot better at demonstrating value. In terms of investment to get Puppet supporting Windows, if that's what you're talking about, how would I demonstrate to somebody?
Well, as an example, or anything, because the folks that see the value aren't the folks that necessarily want or have the ability to pay money.
Right.
That's right.
So I've had pretty good luck. I mean, it looks very likely that some of my clients are going to pay me to do some custom development. You want this functionality. It's really important to you. You don't have the manpower to do it, or people have these different buckets that money goes in, and this bucket can be used to spend on this stuff but not on that stuff. So people are willing to spend money on custom development. I haven't had that much effort convincing them that custom development is worth it in some cases. A Windows port, I think, would be a lot of work. So that's not 5, 15 grand. It's 6 months of somebody's effort probably, and a lot of test code. So that could be a lot more work. I don't know how I would demonstrate that value. It would have to matter to somebody a lot that it ran on Windows, basically. So they would have to really believe in how Puppet thought about the world. And I haven't talked about what the other projects that I have that I'm working on. Because all the compiling happens on the server, there's a lot of room for introspection on your configuration. You can store all of your you can store your compiled configs on the server in a database. So there is a Puppet database, but so you can store them in a database and do introspection, like which machines have this deployed. You can get what looks a lot like an asset manager that is derived from your real configuration. And then when you get logs back and reports back, those logs and reports will say things like, this aspect of your DNS configuration is broken, even though it's a file that doesn't say anything about DNS. Puppet knows that's a file related to providing DNS support. So you can get a lot of server-side processing that's very difficult normally, and a lot of tools just don't provide it. Bconfig is very good at this. This is something that Bconfig excels at, is this reporting.
Right.
And I'm doing my best to copy that guy as quickly as possible. So, but it enables me to do that kind of stuff. So if it's important to have this kind of tool, you want it to be open source, and you do have to run on Windows, I don't think I can convince somebody else of that value. Somebody else has to be convinced that they really need this problem solved. And today, it would probably be difficult for them to say, spend a bunch of money on me personally, because I don't have any Windows expertise. I don't have a guy who's a very good Windows programmer. So, and Ruby, I don't know how good Ruby's Windows support is. I believe it's getting better all the time, like the Beatles would say, but I don't know if it's there yet. So I can't tell you that.
I don't do Windows.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, that's my biggest problem. Is I literally have been, fortunately, never have had to do Windows.
I understand it's there.
Yes, I've heard this, and it's like the gum on the sidewalk. You just go, whoa, don't step in that, I don't know.
Quick question about.
Hold on a second. What?
You mentioned the community. How is the community today, and also in regards to users on alternate operating systems and so on? Do they contribute a lot of their own experiences and so on?
Yeah, so somebody just contributed some Gen 2 support, like init scripts, and something else, I think service management for Gen 2. I don't know if SUSE counts as an alternative operating system or not.
That's an operating system?
So, what kind of things are you talking about, like BOS, or are you talking about like how alternative do you mean?
Well, I'm just thinking, like, if you were to say, what is your rough user base today, if you were to give it a guess?
I would say that the vast majority of people are running on Red Hat and Debian.
Sorry, how many users, or like if you were to active contributors, passive?
So I'd say I have close to 10 people who are actively involved in producing and getting rid of bugs. I've got at least 5 people who commonly contribute patches or close bugs or produce content back out. Somebody asks a question, somebody gets involved, they produce content back out. I've got something like 100 people on the developers mailing list, which is basically the same thing as the users mailing list at this point. I know that my dev mail traffic is 100K plus every month, which is not a very good metric, but it's all the metric I got. A lot of that might be tickets. I'm sure a lot of it is tickets. It depends on the month, right? So some of I get a lot of enhancement requests. the user base in terms of who's using it varies quite dramatically in terms of skill level. I know I have some people who they probably have heard of Unix and Linux. You know, it's like, I don't know, I got this box and I started using Puppet. And I mean, as far as I can tell, these guys, they have no idea what they're doing, but they're trying to use Puppet to do whatever it is. So, and then I also have people who, I just heard, in fact, last week, there's a guy who works at Red Hat, David Lettercourt, who's the package maintainer for Puppet. He built all the spec files and make sure the packages look good and work well. He just told me that Red Hat has had this stateless Linux initiative for a long time. They're going to start shipping this to clients. And apparently Red Hat has decided to make Puppet a core of stateless Linux. If you're going to use stateless Linux from Red Hat, you're going to also use Puppet. So Red Hat has a number of people. They've got somebody who just did all the LVM modeling using these new Conga tools, which I don't know what they are, but apparently it's a new way to interact with LVM. He modeled all that in Puppet. So you can use Puppet to manage all of that file system, volume group insanity using Puppet. So these guys, Red Hat's spending a good bit of money on making sure this stuff works. They're looking at trying to get their service people to start using it and internal admins to use it. There's another company who's spent, it's been a very long week. There's another company who's got some people internally who are using it, and then a number of, a consultant in Australia who's spending a lot of time on it. His company is going to pay to do some custom development and stuff like that. So it definitely runs the gamut. It's not 1,000 years. I don't think there are 1,000 implementations. Deutsche Post is using it and has been using it for 8 months. They were one of the first users. These guys just started emailing me in bad English and asking questions. But they've been using it for months and months, and I don't know exactly what they're doing. And, it involves Solaris and so on. If you've ever run an open source project, you'll know you just have no idea. You could have 0 users or 1,000 or 10,000. If you had 100,000, you'd probably know it. But you could have a lot and not really know it.
How does it compare to NetDirector?
So I've actually been talking to the people who write NetDirector, and we're trying to find a way to, at least I'm trying to find a way to get them to replace their agent with Puppet's agent. Because NetDirector is another open source tool. I think it just recently went open source.
Yeah.
And it's got a Python backend, and it's got a very good GUI. So they've spent a lot of time on this GUI, which we need GUIs, right? Or at least some people need GUIs. And so my goal is to get them to the point where they can reuse Puppet's agent, because Puppet's agent has almost all the functionality of their agent. It's almost a complete overlap. So the modeling is not very similar. Their GUI is, they have a very dumb agent. They don't do much thinking on the client. So they pretty much say, here's a file, here's a command, that's just about it. So they do all the translation, all the modeling from this high-level object to low-level commands on the server, which BladeLogic also does 99% of the time. They've been talking about trying to move that to the edge, but they haven't, as of last I heard, 18 months ago they hadn't, and it didn't look like they were going to get it done anytime soon, because they didn't think it was important. But so Puppet's agent is very smart, all the modeling's on the agent, but I can do all the work they want to do.
Okay.
The tools are very different because they're very GUI centric. They're very, user friendly is a bad term because I think Vim is user friendly. So, but it's very new user friendly, I would say. And so I hope we can find a way to work together. And there also is a group called the Open Management Consortium, and it was just founded in May, and I'm one of the members. And the goal is to find all these open source companies, these companies who are producing open source management products, people who have money behind getting these products high level, high quality, getting them to work together so that our tools are integrated and we can avoid reproducing the same work. How many people have to write a library that knows how to create a user in NetInfo? How many people have to, it's ridiculous how much duplication there is. So the goal is to try to reduce that. And Hyperion is in that group, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so that's the goal.
Can't you ask either the RPM folks or the D-package folks to just give it up?
I would like to ask both of them that in the same room at the same time, and then close the door and throw some mean cats in the room. Sure, which one's going to do it, right? To me, it's a rat hole. Until I can get something, I'd like to get something to the point where, again, to me, I want manageable software to win. I would like Puppet to be so good, or some tool like Puppet. I'm not egotistically attached to Puppet. I want this functionality. I want this to be this easy. I have this vision of how easy it should be to talk to systems. If somebody else provides that vision before me, I'm not going to be offended. I'm going to change fields because they'll, woohoo, we're done. But if somebody else provides that, whoever does it, it should make it so obvious that packaging sucks that somebody will go, oh, there's this huge gap in good software. So I'm hoping that better software will clearly be better, as opposed to just, well, I mean, they both kind of suck. You know, they just suck differently. One of them should clearly be a lot better, and one of them, you know,
Right.
it should be obvious, right? You should be able to look at any two pieces of software and say, this one is more manageable. But that's never a test, right? I mean, how many companies ask themselves when they go to buy a piece of software, but how manageable is it? How easily can I automate it? Not nearly enough, because no commercial software I've ever bought has been easy to automate.
It's the same ones who ask if it's secure or not.
Well, and the answer is usually about as good. Why, yes, I've told you it's secure, and therefore it is. Okay, good.
Trust.
So, how big a difference do you think there is between, say, Lilo and Grub regarding manageability?
I personally consider Grub to be roughly 100x manageably than Lilo. Lilo is one of those tools that I would like to. I don't know. I'm assuming you guys have all seen the Jay and Silent Bob Do Hollywood movie or whatever. And at the end, they take all their money and they fly around beating up people who have said bad things about them online. The author of Lilo was one of those people I'd like to fly to his house and beat him up, because that's how bad I think that software is. Your system can't boot and all you get is LI? No, I'm sorry. You should get beaten up for that.
He just lives over at Sunnyvale, so we can go there afterwards if you want.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be fine.
And it's the only one that works on MacBooks at the
But
moment.
Luke, isn't it fair to say that there's only a limited amount of code you can fit into 460 odd bytes?
I don't know. All I know is that Grub actually tells me what's going on. I don't get LI when Grub can't boot my system.
Actually, if Grub is at the same stage where Lilo could only give you LI, Grub is actually worse. It will give you less diagnostic information than that. 'Cause
Each
LI
letter
means it
signifies a
cannot
different
find the
level
part
of
of
progress.
I know.
the rest of the bootloader.
Now you're
But anyway.
Well,
I don't want to get into that rabbit hole. I clearly already did, but
Yeah.
as I understand it, Grub cheats because it will use like a whole cylinder for some of
Yeah,
its
so-
stuff instead of just one little.
I don't know.
No. We can take that offline.
Yeah, and frankly, anyway, bootloaders is one of those things that the fact that you need a bootloader is annoying, right? So we're already in a rabbit hole.
So you're talking about Puppet configurations of the program and
Right.
running the tools of a software engineer. So what do you do about a debugger and a test suite?
I would say that Puppet is a compiler and Puppet manifests are programs, and they're probably at the same point that C was in 1972. So I hope to have those someday, and I don't yet. I mean, again, this is just me. I've been doing this for 18 months, and I want those things, and those are clearly in the plan. And the more people I have who care about this product and are using it to do complicated things, the better it will be. But I do not have those right now, and I haven't had the brain space to start planning it yet.
Yeah, I know Steve Traugott was doing stuff with Zen for the test suite kind of thing. I don't know if that's going to work, but
Yeah.
at least not comprehensively. But
So fundamentally, Steve's idea that you have to replicate your entire infrastructure, and you can do so, and it's a valid test. I don't believe that's I mean, you have a test server and a production server. The production server is in use all the time, and so var is full because it creates logs. And the test server is not in use, and so var is empty.
right.
Boom. You know, your test works and your production fails. I mean, it's just, you cannot sufficiently replicate, so that's not a valid way to test things.
Right.
There's a much better way to test things, and the real way you need to test things is, given what I think this configuration should produce, does it actually produce those kind of things? So I think that's where tests are going to look, but I don't know what the unit tests are going to, it's going to be hard to unit test this kind of thing. I know that. I don't know how it's going to work.
Is there a dry run mode?
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a dry run mode, and I'm working on things like diff mode, where you can actually get so right now you can say, run this in dry run mode, run the whole config, or these pieces of the config in dry run mode. I'd like to get to the point where you could actually go to a system and say, print me out a nice diff, so I can take that and then, manually massage that in some ways that I want. There's also, one of the things that drove me nuts about CF Engine was that it worked very well standalone when it was running on its own, but if you were using it to update a configuration, you're making changes and you're kind of iteratively getting into the right configuration, you had to run the whole configuration each time, and it got took a lot of time, and it got to the point where you were spending all this wait time and visible time doing things. So in Puppet, you can actually specify, I want to just run this class, run the code related to the LDAP server class.
Right.
And so I do everything I can to make it so that it's easy as a sysadmin who's trying to build a configuration, easy to do things like that. So there is run mode though. Yeah?
What is Puppet written in?
It's written in Ruby.
Ruby?
Yeah. So I was a Perl developer when I started writing Puppet, and all the code that I'd done before that, I'd never seen Ruby in my life when I started writing Puppet. And I tried to write it in Perl, because at the time I was convinced Perl kicks ass. And I couldn't. And so I tried to write it in Python, because everyone was saying how great Python was. This is like 3 years ago, before they'd heard of Ruby. And Python makes my eyes bleed, so I just can't do it. I don't know what it is.
Have you and Alex Martelli ever been in the same room together?
Alex Martelli?
Yeah, just wondering.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
It's possible.
I'd like to see you guys duke it out. But anyway, go ahead.
I don't really feel like arguing it. Like I can't argue Python's technical faults. I can't tell you other than little niggly things that just make you go, what? Other than that, it just makes my eyes bleed. I don't know what it is. I see that code and it hurts. And I've successfully written functional Python code since then. And I had to get glasses. I mean, it's horrible. So I tried Ruby, because I had a friend who'd heard Ruby was good. He'd never seen Ruby either, but he was like, oh yeah, I got people, they say it's great. So I was like, okay, I'll try that. And in 4 hours, I went from having never seen a line of Ruby code in my life to having a functional prototype that I couldn't write in Perl, which I knew really, really well at the time. So since then, it was like, I'm throwing the receipt away. I'm keeping it. Oh yeah. It's big in Japan. It was written by a guy whose nickname is Mats. He's out of Japan. He's Japanese. So it's at least as old as Python. It's been around for more than a decade. But the documentation was just recently translated to English. So
That makes it.
It's a little easier for English-speaking people to learn now.
the code's right there. I mean, come on. The code's in English, right?
It's open source.
Yeah. So and Ruby on Rails is the big reason why Ruby is getting a lot of attention. I've been using this since before Ruby on Rails was written. But now that Ruby on Rails is big, it's a big web framework that there's a lot of talk about it. If you were to go search for it, you would see lots of froth, lots of people talking about how great it is, or how I could do that in Python, well, I could do that in Perl. There's a lot of discussion about that. So Ruby's gotten a lot more attention because of that. So I'm thankful for those guys, at least because of that, if nothing else. So.
Have you looked at Nitro?
I have not. Is that another web framework or what?
Yeah, Arg Nitro. Arg is the ORM, and Nitro is the framework.
I don't like writing web applications. So I've used Rails a little bit because I had to, and because in some ways it makes sense for me to use Rails, but do my very best not to write web applications because I can't. They always look horrible. So I just feel like, yeah.
So just an idea for like a test system, like production versus test scenario or whatever. Wouldn't you be able to use like a similar to like tripwire or like a hash checksum like system where you actually got like a complete these are the files that were created and after like a complete dry run versus and then you could do a.
I think there's going to be a lot of that kind of stuff in there where you do have ways to validate the output of the system. I don't know what it's going to look like in the end. I've got a lot of like relatively vague ideas for how to test the output, how to recompute the output so you know it, you run it through again and make sure you get the consistent results. But the big problem is how to translate intent into reality. Well, I think you should be running this service. Well, am I right? So the real unit test is, can you hook your configuration management system up to your monitoring system in a way that your monitoring system will tell you whether you're right or not? I mean, I think there are a lot of ways like that where you can specify both directions, the configuration direction and then the output direction, so that you've got unit tests built into the system. I deploy a new configuration, and my monitoring system will tell me right now if that configuration is providing the output that I expect. And your monitoring system should be good enough that when you say, I want you to run LDAP, it goes, I will make sure you're running LDAP. And you should have it programmed in a way that it can speak to your services and validate that they're working correctly. That's very difficult to do. That costs, you can pay 2 guys 120 grand a year and still not get it, but you sure are spending a lot of money. It's not easy. I don't know.
Yeah, but basically what I'm thinking is, let's say that you build 2 systems that are technically identical, but they're placed in 2 different scenarios. One is placed in a network connected only to a test network. One is, and as you said, one is creating a lot of test files, and the one is not. And eventually the var fills up.
Yeah.
In example, tripwire monitoring disk would trigger on the var files because it would see, oh, a lot of files are changing, or these files are changing on this.
The problem is that a lot of that stuff, you can do all those things, but it's really, it's very difficult to set up. That's what I would say. I'm probably a solid year for spending a lot of time on that kind of stuff, just because it takes so much effort to do, essentially. You have a question?
Yeah, how tightly coupled is Ruby syntax to other config?
Right now, it's not tightly coupled at all.
Okay.
You could certainly re-implement Puppet in another language, and it would look Ruby-ish because Puppet looks Ruby-ish. But as far as I know, there is nothing about Puppet that is tied to Ruby with some very brief, small exceptions. The templating format is ERB, so that's Ruby, of course. There are a couple of small semantics, like true and false. I actually use Ruby's true and false, which that shouldn't be that hard, right? And then I use Ruby's regex engine internally to do some, whether this is a valid string or that, whether this needs to be quoted or that's okay on its own. Most of those are pretty small and are pretty portable. Perl and Ruby and Python, I think, all have the same definition of what a word is, all the same definition of what, that kind of thing. So, it might not be fun in C, but then what is, right? So, yes.
Did you actually apply to like Google Summer of Code to get some developers to help you out?
I did not. Yeah, I did not. I have talked as much as possible. I've tried to find anybody who I thought would be interested in this. I've talked to essentially every investor who would be willing to talk to me. I've talked to I haven't tried to call the CEO of companies. If I've got connections at companies that I know tend to invest in this kind of thing, I've tried to talk to those investors, those people. I did interview at Google, and my goal was to see if they would be interested in working on a tool like this that was going to be available publicly, and the answer was essentially not really. We're big believers in using open source. So I kind of have given up on at least Google being involved at all. Other companies seem to have a little more interest. I think I've talked to a couple people at Yahoo who were interested in trying to be involved in Puppet in some way. It didn't really occur to me that the Summer of Code would be a good option. I have talked to Paul Graham about, he's got the micro investment stuff, so I've talked to him some, and he only does web applications, so. I could try that next time it rolls around and see if they're interested, but it would be interesting, I guess. I don't know, I hadn't thought of that one though. Any other questions? Anything that you feel like I was grossly negligent in mentioning? And it's only been, what, an hour and a half, so. We can keep this going for another 2, can't we?
And just keep feeding Yoast caffeine after going.
Yeah. Well, it looks like that's about it, right? Oh, another question?
Do you think that most of your new users or new converts to Puppet come from people that don't have existing configuration management systems, or people that have bad ones, or ones they don't get along with?
Almost no one hates their configuration management system enough that they're willing to change it. There are some exceptions, one of them is in this room. But people are very fond of the evil they know. And so on the one hand, a lot of them kind of realize there are problems with whatever they're using. They're very seldom willing to say, and I'm willing to spend 6 months changing it. So the vast majority of them have kind of heard of some of these tools, but a surprising number of them haven't actually heard of any of these. And they've somehow come across Puppet and have gone, well, that looks interesting, and they start messing around with it. I mean, I'm always quite surprised at who's using it, what they're trying to do, and so to me that's a good sign, right? People trying to do small things with small tools. That was definitely one of my goals with Puppet, is that if you want to be a sysadmin and you want to manage 1,000 nodes, you want to build this complicated central configuration, you can do that. But if you just don't want to learn net info and you want to use Puppet to manage users on your OS 10 box, you can do that too. So, most cases people are not switching. Those are rare examples, and those are the really high-level people who really know their stuff and are really, really tired of what they're using. So,
is a factor the API to this knowledge base?
well, Factors is a tool that knows how to answer simple questions like what's your operating system, what's your IP address, what's your...
so it runs on the client?
Yes, it runs on the client.
So I'm talking about the server side. So is there a way to query the attribute store?
So it's experimental right now. I'm working on using the Rails database layer to store those in a database, to cache those compiled configurations in a database. And I'm working on a Rails application. Can anyone guess the name of a web application for Puppet? It's called Puppet Show, because it has to be. That will interact with the database and allow you to do querying. And then, of course, it is going to be a Rails application. It is going to be in a SQL database, so you can do SQL queries against it, or you can write another Rails plugin or whatever. I mean, that'll be the interface essentially. I doubt that portion of the tool will ever be available via an XML RPC API, but I haven't had the reason to use it yet. So.
Right. But the web interface, you'd want to be able to see what the basic data is and is stored in the model, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, you want to be able to do introspection. You'd like to be able to do validation, you like to do auditing, you like to do reporting. I mean, the reporting especially a very big deal. So all these things you want to take advantage of this data.
Right.
Clearly, we should be taking advantage of it.
Right.
So that's my goal, is to build a reporting system, and I've got 2 potential clients who are looking at subsidizing the development of a good reporting system, and I'm hoping that pans out because I think that's a really important part of it.
So that means that the client feeds data back to the server, just like in BeaconFig.
Yeah, so there is a transaction report that every time you run Puppet, it collects all the logs from that run, it collects as many benchmarks as it knows how to collect, and it turns those into a report and passes that back to the server. And right now, the server pretty much just like stores those, and it can email you log reports and stuff like that. But it's pretty simplistic reporting.
So what's your plan? Is your plan to do what BCFD2 does, where they have a database where they store this information on a per host group?
I have not had the time to develop a plan.
But that's your okay.
I will.
Thinking about how to do that.
It would be silly of me to develop a reporting system that was not at least as good as BeaconFig. I would say that because I mean, in terms of open source projects, they're clearly my competitor at this point.
Yeah. Because the really nice thing that I think makes BeaconFig valuable is that you can see which machines are out of spec and why. Very, very quickly. Even if you have 1,000 machines, the reporting makes it really powerful.
Yes.
You're already running Cricket on the clients. I saw it, in one of the classes,
Yeah.
right?
Well, part of my Puppet config, I have essentially a network of 1 machine at home now, so I don't actually do any work on my machines at home, thankfully. I've been giving them away periodically and recycling them and stuff. So a significant portion of my config is I translated CF Engine configurations to Puppet to make sure I could, and then I never use them. So I'm not running Cricket anywhere, but I'm also not running Nagios anywhere, and I'm not running a lot of these tools that I have Puppet configurations to manage. They're just still there, even though I'm not using them. So.
Yeah, because those performance web pages are great, for
Oh yeah,
watching everything.
and one of the reports Puppet has, it can do RRD graphs of the benchmarks. I can guarantee that if you were to use that, you would go, well, I don't like this, it should go this way. And because I didn't think about it very much, I just kind of said, well, I should have something. I want to take some time and spend 2 months on reporting and really get a good reporting system. I just haven't,
You can see user patterns and network patterns, what's overloaded.
Oh, yeah.
The way things are managed.
I think that's critical. I mean, visualization, the ability to visually understand what's going on in your network is clearly a really, really important part of these tools. And that's one of the things that I've been decrying about them, is that it's very difficult the feedback loop is crappy. You can put stuff in, you never get it back out again. It's critical to me that you can get it back out again, and I do want to solve that problem. It's just, I'm a 99% contributor at this point. I've gotten less than 1% of Puppet is from other people. A lot less than 1%. I think I'm the only person who really understands the whole framework. So because of that, I haven't had the time to spend on essentially satellite projects, because reporting is going to be decoupled from Puppet. It's going to be as separate a tool as possible. And so it is a satellite project, and I just haven't had the time to spend on it yet.
I think one way to get more people involved in it, which I see happen with Rails and Nitro, is to have good documentation, because that poses a really high barrier for people to be able to participate if they can't get it. And the other thing is that makes it hard for people to participate. I see this with Nitro especially. They keep changing the damn APIs. So once you have an API that would go for the interface to the reporting system, and Puppet would essentially have to be frozen.
Right.
You have to revision it very carefully. So that would be like a managed transition.
Right. I do my very best to have good documentation. I have a heck of a lot of documentation.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
And as much as possible, I make sure that everything internally has some documentation stored with it, and I can auto-generate a reference based on that. So all these providers, I'm now, as of this week, I can now auto-generate a reference that lists every provider for every type that has providers, plus which operating system it's default provider for, plus what binaries that provider requires in order to operate. So I'm trying to, as much as possible, make all that stuff self-documenting. And I'm very close on the auto-generating reference, but I do need to get a lot more user documentation. And I'm working on that. I've got a cookbook project now that I'm trying to build simple cookbook recipes. Here's how to do this, here's how to do that, here's how to solve these problems, here's how to walk through an initial setup, here's how to walk through building a new class. So I agree, documentation is absolutely critical, and it is a priority of mine, and I do spend a lot of time on it. So.
Kind of about how large some of your sites are, or some sites are that have Puppet installed, and maybe do they have any specific problems with running in large sites?
Essentially no, because people won't usually even tell me that. So I know how many computers some of my clients have, but my job usually with a client, I don't do the deployment. I come in and I help them do the installation, and I help them build their basic structure of their config so that they can use that to deploy on their network, but they fill in all the details, they do all the finalized stuff, and then they actually do the deployment, because that's going to take, usually for political reasons, years. Clients generally don't tell you that. So I know that some of my clients have 1,000 nodes, into the 4 figures of nodes, but I don't know how many they have deployed on or how happy they are or what. So I think Stanford has told me they are going to be very public about how they use Puppet. They're going to be writing up white papers and talking about their experience and very public about it, and they're going to do everything they can to share literally all of their configurations. So I think they're going to be a great example, and they should be. If you come back in 6 months, you should be able to get a lot of information from them and their usage, which hopefully will all be positive, right? I mean, they're excited today, but we'll see how they feel in a month, right? This is the last question. I think we should stop. It's been almost 2 hours.
Right. So we got a racket full of machines. We have their MAC addresses. There's some switches in this rack. They have serial numbers. How would you model that in Puppet? So that you need some base description of these machines, right? So
let's talk about that afterwards. If you want, you can email me or we can talk on the phone or something. Because I think the modeling stuff, you always have to take 5 minutes to think about it. And I mean, usually I kind of go like this. Oh. And I don't want to do that in front of everyone. The red mark looks a bit funny. So,
fair enough. We've done this too, so we just want to see what yours looks like.
Yeah. I actually was doing this from the plane on the way here, trying to figure it out. Anyway. So yeah, I'd be glad to talk to you about that. But and especially the stupid thing is, because I'm a full-time developer now, I end up not doing a lot of these. I end up not doing all the detailed implementations. So there are people who might actually be able to help you better than that, because they're users of the tool and I'm just the stupid developer. So.
Right. That was great. Thank you.
So, great.